Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and the Last Nighters can be found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. This is episode 99 of the show, and we're talking about the Tom Hanks movie Castaway for our Thanksgiving episode this year, as Tom Hanks' final words in the film are, "Thank you." We want to express our gratitude for our listeners and the abundance afforded us, and we have an abundance of content coming your way. We're going to stuff this turkey so chock full of stuff, and we couldn't think of anyone better to be able to do that, especially at the speed in which he does it. Our guest is Keith Knight of Don't Tread on Anyone. He also works sometimes with Pat McFarlane at Liberty Weekly, and this guy can talk a mile a minute. So we're going to try to keep up of his exploits. One of his main channel videos is called The Ultimate Red Pill, which is over 5 hours long and highlights example after example of the true nature of the state and our benevolent overlords. So Keith, welcome to the show. Your YouTube channel is Don't Tread on Anyone. You want to just introduce yourself and let people know what they can find on your excellent YouTube channel.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for having me. What you will find on my YouTube channel, and please subscribe to my BitChute channel. I am really on thin ice with the virtuous YouTube crowd and Google. What you'll find on there is my attempt to make the best libertarian, voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist arguments that I'm able to. Sometimes I try responding to arguments. Other times I take things that are just in the news. Other times I'll do book summaries. I just try to respect the viewer's time as much as possible and make a short, brief, to the point video. It's not necessarily a podcast, but my average video is maybe 10 minutes long or so. That 5-hour one is a total exception, just because my attempt was to say, you know what, the statists get kids 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for 12 years. I think in one day I can change the mind of far more people and convince them of an actually virtuous philosophy in 1/100th of the amount of time in 1 year that the statists need to justify violence in the name of the collective. So yeah, the Ultimate Red Pill is one that I have. I basically have a very best of, because I'm at like 440 videos now. I have a best of Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone that I definitely recommend people check out.
All right, very cool. And I like the perspective of comparing it to the amount of time that someone would spend in an education or re-education camp, as I'd refer to it as, versus your 5 hours, which sounds like a lot, but when you put it that relative scale, it's really far different. And in the news today, I saw that public school in Illinois was putting children in solitary confinement, which is kind of a big deal, and it sort of segues directly into our movie, because they use solitary confinement in prison as a psychological torture. They did it to Julian Assange for years in the embassy in London, and they're doing worse stuff to him now. And we see it in our lead character here, Chuck Nolan, Tom Hanks's character in Castaway. He's on an island for 4+ years, and he starts talking to volleyball. I mean, he goes kind of crazy, because we are social animals and we do need to have social interaction. It's on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if I recall. I mean, I'm dusting that off a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that we do need social interaction to be able to be fully human people. And when you deny people that, or in the circumstances in this movie, he wasn't afforded it. He was unable to acquire any social interaction. He suffered for it. So that's my way of kind of segueing into this movie, I guess. I'll take Keith, your comments, and then we'll go to Robert, and then I'll get into the Google description, which is usually how we kick this bad boy off. But any reaction to what I said? Because I feel like it was somewhat relevant, poignant, maybe even.
Oh yeah, definitely makes you appreciate the division of labor, if not anything else, and the amount of capital that is in current circulation. Especially when you see him, when he takes the skate to his infected tooth and then nails it with a rock just to get it out. It's like, well, at least he didn't, ship his job overseas to another island. At least he kept it on the island, even though, he's going to get infected and he's miserable and he passes out, and that's going to hurt his ability to work in the future and sustain life. At least he kept it within the nation in the nationalist principle. So what I really liked was just the value of community. And so long as it's voluntary, I think we should definitely appreciate the organizations that we voluntarily associate with. Robert, any initial thoughts, brother?
Oh, just to back up Daniel's idea of the great power of the division of labor. I mean, if you're familiar with the great documentaries of Swiss Family Robinson and Gilligan's Island, you will know that if you have a scientist on the island, you can make a radio out of coconuts. You can have like houses You can have basketball tournaments. You can have all kinds of things. But if you're all by yourself, you're sleeping in a cave in a loincloth and you're trying to kill yourself. You got to do everything yourself. You've got to be your tailor. You got to be the farmer. You got to be name the profession. You've got to do that, and you got to do it to your own satisfactory ability. If you don't have that knowledge, you got no real way to attain that knowledge all by yourself out there. So yeah, the anarcho-primitive style. I don't know if an exact anarcho-primitive would exactly argue that you need to be alone, but they do seem to argue for, and not like there's a million anarcho-primitives and not like anybody pays attention to them. I'm not saying that, but I do think they advocate some sort of a return lifestyle to a very agrarian, do-it-yourself kind of thing, and just how much that sucks, how much work is involved. And yeah, there is something to be said for returning to the land and putting your labor and mixing it with the land. And there's something very satisfying about that. But there's a reason why the world went from agrarian to manufacturing base in the Industrial Revolution, because everybody knew that working on a farm, backbreaking labor with like a rake or like a pitchfork, and you're like shoveling hay into a wagon for 12 hours a day, sucked ass in the burning sun, and you'd rather work in a smoke congested factory because it's just better. So yeah, division of labor is huge, and these kind of people that, and I sympathize again. I sympathize for people that want to go back to the land and kind of get out of the rat race, but to not recognize the extreme value we get from the division of labor is madness, and this movie kind of illustrates that.
All right, well said, Robert. Well, let's get into the Go-Go description, and then we'll pick up after that, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to talk about here. So, Cast Away came out in the year 2000. It's a drama/romance, oddly enough. 2 hours and 23 minutes, 7.8 on IMDb, 88% Rotten Tomatoes, 73% Metacritic, and 93% of Google users thumbs upped this movie, Commodus style. Obsessively punctual FedEx executive Chuck Noland, played by Tom Hanks, is en route to an assignment in Malaysia when his plane crashes over the Pacific Ocean during a storm. The sole survivor of the flight, Chuck washes ashore on a deserted island. When his efforts to sail away and contact help fail, Chuck learns how to survive on the island, where he remains for years, accompanied only by his handmade volleyball friend, Wilson. Will Chuck ever return to civilization and reunite with his loved ones? Came out on December 7th, 2000. Director is Robert Zemeckis, and won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor Motion Picture Drama for Tom Hanks. Was also nominated for several Academy Awards, and it has been a bit of a cultural, impactful film. I think a lot of people are familiar with it. Of course, the Super Bowl commercial that came out a few years after, where a Tom Hanks lookalike delivers a package that he kept with him on the island, delivers it to this woman after he gets rescued, and asks, well, what was in it, by the way? And she says, oh, just this satellite phone, a GPS locator, packet of seeds, some matches, just normal random stuff, whatever, But Robert, what's your take on the Google description and your opening salvo? Then we'll go to Keith.
Well, this movie is a lot of fun. I remember being quite taken with it back when it first came out, and I bought the DVD and watched the making of featurettes and all that. And this movie is quite impressive because they used, like, Bob Zemeckis hired the crew, and then he went off, like, he got fat Tom Hanks, right, for the beginning of the movie. And then, like, they came back after 9 months. They went over and they filmed another movie, and then they came back, and after Tom Hanks had lost all the weight and, got tanned up and whatever, to do the rest of it. So it's quite interesting, and that they were able to even, like, plan out among, big Hollywood type celebrities and their schedules and that sort of thing, that they could even make a movie like this. But, I appreciate anytime somebody dedicates, that level of dedication to their profession. But I appreciated that you mentioned how Chuck Nolan he's like a time stickler, because he delivers a speech in the beginning of the movie where he rips on the USPS. And well, not necessarily. I think, does he rip on it in the speech, or does he do it later? He's like, no, he does it later when he's getting on the plane. And he's like, today we're 2 minutes late. Tomorrow we're 4 minutes late. The next day we're the USPS. And yeah, I mean, the USPS, they're a subsidized outfit that loses money all the time. They don't necessarily have competition, in the sense that they don't have to compete in a market under market forces, because they can just afford to lose money, because they're just spending taxpayer dollars. But yeah, that was a fun dig at the USPS. I appreciated that. And yeah, it's a good movie. It's a good movie. This is back in the day when who's the lady? Who's the lady in this movie? Because she was in like all the movies.
Helen Hunt.
Helen Hunt. She was in the movies. She was the leading lady of the. Well, she was one of the main leading ladies in the late '90s, and so I liked her. I mean, she's not super gorgeous, but I liked her personality a lot. I was also a big Meg Ryan fan, so I watched all these movies when with Tom Hanks. He was always pairing up with chicks I liked, so it was good.
All right, very good. Keith, your take on the description, and then any of the nonsense that Robert has spewed out before us on this Thanksgiving table.
Well, the USPS shot definitely stood out to me. It's just one of those where, before FedEx and UPS and DHL, competitors entered the market, but without government, how would we have X? In this case, X equals mail delivery. And of course, today the post office has a monopoly on first-class envelope mail. The left continuously trying to protect us from monopolies while supporting the monopoly Federal Reserve, monopoly on AR-15s, and a monopoly on mail, and compulsory education. Funny way of justifying the state and fighting with the proletariat yet again. I enjoyed the movie overall. Thought it was ironic that it came out December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. Unbelievable. Interesting thing about Pearl Harbor. There's a document, the McCullen Memo, which actually states 7 ways they could get the Japanese to attack. And it turns out FDR knew about the plan. This was published in an article titled War Entry Plans, published by the New York Times, January 2nd, 1972. It's in Ralph Rako's book, and you can verify it online. So December 7th, you'd think they would avoid such a controversial date. The time analogy, or not the analogy, the time speech that he gives at the beginning, I wonder what the real meaning in that was, because, he's so obsessed with the clock and, delivery time. I think it's someone so focused on punctuality and getting things on time and not being able to appreciate the finer things in life that later he's on an island with no one. And he's got all the time in the world. So this guy that was so, stressed for time, now you've got the time. Well, what's really important? Well, the people, and that's what you should be thankful for. So much so at the end of the film, he's sort of going back on his life saying, it's unbelievable. I was there for 4 years. I tried killing myself. I couldn't even hang myself the way I wanted. And now I have ice in my glass. Like he was appreciating that ice cubes were of reasonable access and abundance. So yeah, I really appreciated the movie. The time obsessed thing was definitely a good take, especially around Thanksgiving time. So yeah, I thought that was a fair summary of the film.
Yeah, his quote was, "Time rules over us without mercy, not caring if we're healthy or ill, hungry or drunk, et cetera, et cetera." And it's kind of ironic because when he's stranded on this island, it seems as though he has an abundance of time, nothing but time, very, very little else. But when you break it down to, well, he has to literally do everything for himself, from shelter to warmth to clothing, all of those things. He doesn't actually even have enough time to devote his very limited human resource, his human energy, and whatever he can find on the island to actually accomplish satisfying any of those needs to a very high level beyond primitive. Even when, and I know we're skipping around a bit, but even when he's like making his plan to escape the island, he's been there long enough to understand how the tides work and the currents and the where the sun's going to be and what time of year it is and when will be the most ideal time for him to try to overcome the breakwater and get out into the open ocean. And he calculates how much rope he'll need to create his raft and how quickly he can make that much rope. And he's like months out, and he works out in his head and he barely has enough time if he works just furiously to try to get it accomplished. So it's kind of this weird, he's driven by time earlier when he's in the technological abundance that was the year 2000, or I guess 1995, as the beginning of the story is placed. And if you think about it right now, would you consider 1995 very advanced? Like, no one's got Wi-Fi. You can't get food or Amazon deliveries in like an hour, let alone 2 days. I mean, I'm looking back on how quaint 1995 is in this movie. And when the power goes out here in my house, it's not that much more antiquated feeling than when just the Wi-Fi is down. It's that weird now. So anyway, that's just a little side rant. But yeah, he's got seemingly nothing but time. But even that isn't enough to give him very much of a standard of living beyond a very primitive level. I'll go to Robert. What's your take on any of that? And then let's get into whichever path you'd like to go down.
Well, you're right. He was. I mean, there's something to be said for having to do everything yourself, and also not having the motivation, like having nobody around you. Yeah, I just see him as he obviously doesn't give a shit about his personal appearance, doesn't see the need to upgrade his living situation beyond the bare minimum of comfort. I mean, he didn't even like make himself a bed, which I thought was weird. It's like he's sleeping on the bare rock in that cave. Like, what are you doing? Lay some leaves down. At least it takes you like half a second. But in that I want to go back to that Moscow speech just to reiterate. I when I was listening to him make it, I was like, could you imagine anybody in the USPS making this speech? I just don't see it. I just don't see it because they don't have to worry about the competition. But Tom Hanks in the private market, you gotta outcompete other people. So he's absolutely all about time and working hard and getting those packages delivered. So
yeah, and if I could interject, it's relevant that the speech is in Moscow, and this is right after the fall of communism, or
because he's a Russian agent. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he's literally Putin. No, but they even show Lenin's picture being taken down as part of this. But he's making this speech in Russia to Russian workers who, 5 years prior were working in a socialist environment. They were working in where the time didn't really matter as much. And it still took 87 hours to get a package delivered from Memphis, Tennessee to wherever he was in Russia. He's like, entire civilizations have risen and fallen in less time. And he's trying to impart on them that now that they're in a post-socialist kind of society here, they're a burgeoning free market, that they need to start like reinvigorating the competitive spirit within themselves as entrepreneurs, as workers for this company, to actually provide a valuable service for people. Because the status quo of, you're assigned a job and as long as you do, your 80 pounds of nails a day, whether it's one nail or 1,000, they're going to do the, just enough to like satisfy the commissar. And you get what I'm saying, right? Like he's got people who have never had to deal with working in a competitive environment, and he's trying to educate them on that in this speech. And I think it's pretty important.
For sure. Although I tend to think that the proper incentives, do more to educate people than impassioned speeches. But I like the way that the movie imparted that. And I think you're right about him in Moscow, delivering that speech to those people. The incentive problem is a huge problem under communism because you're getting paid the same whether you're taking out the trash or you're doing the brain surgery. So who's going to take out the trash? Or that's why you'd have restaurants where you'd go in there and the service was just atrocious. You'd wait around for hours for your food, and the people are sitting there smoking, and your servers doing there because they're getting paid regardless, and they're getting paid the same regardless. So yeah, it's a nightmare problem, and you don't hear an answer for from the socialists. At least I've never heard a good rebuttal for the motivation problem.
Yeah, well said. And as this is our Thanksgiving episode, I kind of want the theme of this to be, sort of about gratitude, but about something that almost everyone takes for granted, and that is the abundance that hampered capitalism has provided us. Keith, I'm sure you know the stats on this, but extreme poverty has been cut in half in the past 20 years alone. And I saw a stat the other day that said that the UN, and as much as you can't believe them, but they think that extreme poverty will be eradicated in the next 20 or 30 years.
So yes, that definitely makes sense. Basically, you have China ditching Mao's model, and you have India since 1991 embracing much more of a private property system throughout the country. So that's 2 billion people. You also have many examples like North Korea and South Korea giving a lot of motivation to people around the world since the lines were drawn in the late 50s after the Korean War. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. But it's a totally different mindset when you have what Mises called the consumer is king economy under capitalism, where the goal is to meet consumer demand in such a large way that you get the most amount of money, as opposed to appealing to the few feudal lords of the past or the mercantilists, or spending your time, energy, resources, lobbying the state for rent-seeking purposes. You're actually saying, what do we need to do to make the most money? Well, you got to get the most customers, and to do that, you have to have a better product, or you have to be competitive in another way. So he was focusing on time. They didn't focus on the package, the integrity of the package or anything, but there's so many different levels to competing that I'm sure it was totally like day and night for these socialist workers to be like, why do we have to meet the desires of the consumer? Isn't that just what greedy capitalists want? No, they don't want more competition. They never have. In fact, it's actually documented in this book right here, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, the remarkable true story of the American capitalists who financed the Russian communists, by Anthony Sutton. It actually proves that Jacob Schiff, a banker, started communism. They're always pushing for a large state. So instead of having to meet consumer demand, they can just control the state as a mechanism to control finance, monopolize resources, and make themselves more wealthy. Now, granted, it's a very small portion of your average capitalist or entrepreneur, but the idea that the big guys just want total free marketism is ridiculous. Since the days of Friedrich Engels, the very wealthy businessman funding Marx to write the manifesto, it's been a total lie. And I believe I was incorrect when I said all he had was time on the island. I don't know why I thought that for some reason, but I was trying to consider why he would give that speech and then he's all alone on an island. I just associated that with time. But what comes to my mind about that is capitalism, free markets, anything consumer driven makes you more productive because you have access to things at work that allow you to be more productive. So, for example, the fact that I have a telephone and a computer allows me to help about 70 customers a day, whereas without those, I think I'd be able to help 2 people a day. So you're much more productive. That means you have much more leisure time. So that is one great thing to be totally thankful for this Thanksgiving, is the abundance of products and services that allow us to talk and have a conversation from Arizona to Seattle to Japan in real time. That is my take on that portion of the film.
Yeah, and we really do see that on full display and at the primitive level at which Tom Hanks is just struggling with all the effort it takes him to create small comforts like his shelter, fire, or even just having something to drink. Opening a coconut seemed very, very difficult with the. It's like he went through the stages of evolution, caveman, all the way through to present day, like discovering tools and how to use them. I mean, you kind of see it all like in this very compacted film, which was like kind of amazing to see. And I guess the writer, he went onto a deserted beach in Mexico for like a week just to like get more insight into how to write the story and how to write the character. And Wilson, the volleyball that became a character, was a literal volleyball that washed up on the beach in Mexico. And so he wrote it in and used it as part of the story. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I did see that little vignette about that. Talking about Keith and the grinding poverty that happens to Tom Hanks. Yeah, just having nothing, like being thankful for all the wonderful inventions. Just shows how technology makes us all wealthier. Like Keith said, if you have a telephone and a computer, it helps you do so much more. Like every modern convenience, from cars to refrigerators to washing machines and that sort of thing, it all just gives you more leisure time and allows you to do so much more. It makes you a much wealthier person, whereas Tom Hanks is thrown into absolute abject grinding poverty, just struggling to do the most basic thing and struggling to even survive. I mean, if he's out here on this island alone, and if he catches deathly ill, I mean, he could have died from that infection in his mouth. I mean, it wasn't in the script, but of course, that's a very real possibility. He could have, that injury when he hits the coral, cuts himself on the coral. I don't know if any of you guys have cut yourself on coral, but it is nasty. And that cut lasts a long time because those little freaking motherfucking microbes, they get into that cut and they fester. And those little things, yeah, it's nasty. You do not want to get cut on coral. It is horrible.
Yeah, I think he could have died from that as well. And didn't Hanks actually get a cut while he was filming that ended up getting a staph infection, and he was hospitalized as a result?
I don't remember that story, but that sounds like something that very well could have happened.
Oh yeah, well, the amazing thing with the sort of you're starting to see this more and more with AOC, Ilhan Omar, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, Sanders especially. It's like, well, at least they're not being exploited by the bourgeoisie, and at least Bezos isn't making any profits, and exploitation's getting paid a small amount of money, even though they support government schools and universities, going there 12 years while having to dig yourself totally deep into debt. Meanwhile, when you're all alone on this island, you have no exploitation, according to leftist theory, but it's a totally miserable way to go, which is why so many people voluntarily opt to make exchanges, to contract with people who already have ideas, who have already acquired resources, who've already done all the marketing to acquire a customer base. So I think it is a movie that allows you to be thankful for quite a few things. And you just realize that production precedes predation, because Hanks, it's not like the statists will say so often that the reason we're wealthy is because of, things like the New Deal and state investment and all this stuff. There's no amount of theft that Tom Hanks could have engaged in that would have made him wealthier. What he had to do was homestead the resources around him and produce things. Now, of course, imagine if everything he produced, 40% was taken by, a local whale or something. I don't know. I can't think of an analogy. The point is, taxation destroys wealth. Production precedes predation. So we know predation, theft, statism is not the source of wealth, but freedom and voluntarism and homesteading and contract and trade are. So this is a great small scale example how he goes from nothing to sort of having a little something to make himself a boat, to get to another boat, to come back to the U.S.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Caruso economics, which is like a thought exercise when you're introducing some like concepts like Austrian economics. And Murray Rothbard has a bunch of lectures that are related to this, and I'll post one of those on our show notes page at lastnarrative.com/99. It's also the subject of a book by Peter Schiff called How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, which is actually an illustrated version that is basically an island scenario where you build up from just one person and what they need to do with their limited resources, time being one of those resources. They have to basically prioritize things, put them in a margin of utility scale, choose the things they're going to expend resources on, decide if they're going to forego using some of those things in the moment to be able to invest it in a more efficient piece of capital that will be more productive in the future. So it's really, really an interesting thing. And I also think that there's a video, I'll have to find it, but it's the same guy who, it's Bit Butter, right? Robert, you know this guy, he did George Oughta Help or
Edgar.
Yeah,
he's done a couple of videos.
Yeah, and Edgar the Exploiter. And there's another one where it's an island situation and there's this bully that wants to take this guy's stuff on the island. And I forget the name of that one, but I will post that on the show notes page as well. So lots of really good resources related to kind of the concepts we're talking about here. And it's a nice segue into economics. So if anyone's interested in that, lastnarrative.com/99. Also, because this is our Thanksgiving episode, I would be remiss to not mention that there's going to be a whole bunch of Black Friday deals, the best deals of the year on all sorts of stuff, including Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. It's going to be, I think, something like 60% off. Same thing with Bluehost hosting and a few other things. So I'm going to put together a deals page that'll be lastnarrative.com/Friday. Just make it really easy to remember, and I'll have a link to that on the show notes page as well. But if you buy any of those things on our links, we'll get a small fee, small commission as a result, and you won't pay anything additional, but it'll be like a way of kind of supporting us and getting something really cool in return. And maybe we'll throw a few bonuses your way as well. Sorry to throw a little commercial in the middle of this, but we are capitalist pig exploiters, Keith. So, forgive me.
That's totally forgiven. Yes. It's amazing how you can criticize how voluntary commercials can be criticized, but state theft, totally legitimate. Unbelievable. Yeah.
And Robert, to your point about Tom Hanks getting cut up on the coral, and then he was cutting his feet up as well, like Bruce Willis at Nakatomi Plaza. A lot of these islands are volcanic in the South Pacific. And I think that the name of the lava rock is called ah, which is the sound you make when you're walking on them. Like, So I remember that
right?
Being in Hawaii. But he actually made some of my favorite shoes out of his old pants. There's these shoes called Sanooks, which are like flip-flops, but with a little shoe type shell on the top. They're very lightweight. And like he's inventing all sorts of stuff. It's like foretelling the future in this one. It's not like Back to the Future where there's all that conspiracy stuff. This one's a little bit different, but it's pretty good.
So you're saying that the Sanook people ripped off Tom Hanks?
It's possible. It's possible. He really did need shoes. And when he found the dead guy and the extra small shoes, he had to cut the toes out. I guess he wasn't on the island where, all the all the left feet like show up on the beach. Do you remember about that? It used to be like this weird phenomenon that like left-footed shoes, I think with human feet in them still, would wash up on these beaches. But for whatever reason, the right foot wouldn't.
Where is this?
I want to say it's the west coast of the U.S. and Canada. I know it sounds like totally crazy, but I'm pretty sure it's a real thing. I'll find a link to that and put it on the show notes page just to reaffirm that I have not gone crazy and started talking to a volleyball.
So the human traffickers are cutting off their charges left feet and then chucking them overboard? That's happening?
Well, I think the theory is that it's people who are stowaways, like on ships coming out of China, and they're ending up in the water for whatever reason. And because of how the currents work and the shape of the left shoe with a leg in it versus the right shoe with a leg in it is going to catch the current differently. This is the theory.
This can't possibly be true.
Is that what My Left Foot with Daniel Day-Lewis is about?
No.
I've never seen it, but I've heard the title.
All right, I'm going way off into the crazy tangent here, but
I actually think we should do another 40 minutes of this. So are the laces tied when the shoes come up?
I
think so, but
I'm kidding, of course.
I'll find a page on it and post it.
And how do we determine that they're Asian feet, Daniel?
Well, I can't give you a response. It's not going to be a hate speech, so I'm sorry.
Typical white man.
But let's talk about a little bit more about the primitive nature, because he is expending an immense amount of effort. He's trying to get the fire going, and he's even blistering his finger, and then he cuts his damn hand open, thus creating Wilson. And then he discovers, basically through trial and error and accident, that he needed air into the fire because he discovered that the wood had been split. So then he can actually get a fire going consistently. And this is a little bit like me trying to start a fire. I'm terrible at it, but my wife is extremely good at it. We've gone on, we have a wood stove in our house, but we've also gone on vacation in the past and had a little like fireplace kind of thing to try to get going. And I'll spend like an hour trying to do it and just be crappy at it. I'm totally like burning my man card here. My wife will do it for like 5 minutes and fire gets roaring and we make s'mores or whatever. But anyway, I don't know why I'm going down this tangent. I think it's just get us off the foot tangent.
Well, I do appreciate in this film the survivalist angle. I think I remember from the vignettes that they did just talk to a bunch of actual survivalist guys. And the movie kind of follows that. Like Chuck does a lot of things right. So the first thing he's looking for is water, which, is absolutely the first thing you need to look for. I mean, if I were him, I'd set up some sort of a rain collection system, but you don't necessarily need to look for food for the first couple of days. You just need water. You can, you're going to die without water in like 3 days, but you can go for like a month or more without food. So that was nice to see that he was interested in making shelter, and fire and water were his first real things. And then he eventually got around to, catching fish and eating crab and stuff.
Right. And he also built on those skills. Like he's really terrible at all those things initially. And then he adapts and becomes very adept at them as he acclimates to his surroundings. And one more element on time. They show him kind of poking at that tooth a couple of times, even before the plane crash. And he's like, oh, I really should go see the dentist, but I'll just put it off. So that's another element of time, is that don't put something off that needs to be taken care of. Because what if something does happen and now you've worsened your situation? What is it? It's like a Ben Franklin saying, like a stitch in time saves 9. It's like if you take care of an issue early
an ounce
on,
of prevention is equal to a pound of cure.
Exactly, yeah, and that's also on display in this film, because that tooth gets all abscessed and infected and totally nasty. And I mean, he's resorting to knocking it out with a rock to an ice boot, like and
I would have been, that home surgery kit. I sympathize with that guy, because I would be that guy. I probably would have gotten to it before he did. I think I wouldn't have let it get that bad. But I would definitely not flinch at shoving a knife in my mouth and just popping that thing. I mean, that's just what's got to happen. It's going to be gross, but I mean, that's essentially what a dentist is going to do. But I really do enjoy the foreshadowing done in this film. I mean, we all know he's going to end up on an island. I mean, if you watch the commercials, probably you understand, you see the name of the film, and the movie is setting up the mouth thing, and how much time matters to him, and the plane crash, which is still pretty dang terrifying. I remember being super terrifying in the theater at the time, and just how intense the whole thing is, and it's all told from his perspective, and doesn't really know what's going on, and you got all these packages shifting around in the plane. You got the guy that he wants to save, but then he gets killed, and it's all just really good. But the foreshadowing done was really good, and I did appreciate that he doesn't get with Helen Hunt at the end, because she had to move on. It's been 4 years. That's what people do.
Right, even though she was she was reluctant.
That would have been a little too predictive, too predictable. Almost said predictive programming. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Dan. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say that she wanted to get back together with him, but he was like, circumstances beyond our control have intervened, and you have now this new life, and you need to stay with that new life. So I thought that was actually a really powerful moment. That was very respectful of the rest of her family, her child and her now husband.
Yeah, and I thought Tom did a really good job as he's coming back as Chuck Nolan, post Island, to be a completely almost different person. He was very much a man out of out of his place. Like, he's just reacting to all this new stuff. He's like, I thought he did a great job. I mean, Tom Hanks, he probably, I don't know if he's the best, method. I don't know if you want to call him method actor, but putting himself into the role. But I think he did a really good job in this.
Yeah, the thing that kind of blew me away was that when they show him, he gets the Jeep back from Helen Hunt, and he just drives it like it's no thing, no issue at all. I've gone on vacations where I've been gone for like a week or two, come back, and driving my car is like foreign. It's like, wait, how does this work again? He has no problems. He hasn't seen a car in like 4 years. No big deal.
Yeah. Have you ever driven somebody else's car? Like a totally different car or a truck or anything like that? And then you go back to your own car and you're like, this is weird.
Yeah. Wait, where's that again? What is this? And speaking of the name of the film, you mentioned the name. Do you think that there's any significance to why they chose the 2-word version of cast away versus castaway? Because a castaway, like no space, is a noun, and he was a castaway, like on this desert island. But cast away is more like a verb, right? It's like to throw something away or push something away. Do you think there was some significance into the selection of the title, Robert?
Well, now that you say it, probably, but at the time, no. And in fact, in the 20 years since this was released, I've never once thought about that. I always appreciate these weird questions that you ask. You always seem to think more about these movies than I do, and I think I appreciate that.
Well, it came about because I was like needing to write, hey, our next movie with the great Keith Knight is Castaway. And I'm like, well, wait, is it spelled with a space or no space? So I had to look into this.
Well, what would he be casting away? Or because he's not cast away, because they were all searching for him big time, and he wanted to get back to him. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of cast away from society, but not purposefully. Like, it's totally accidental.
Yeah, we don't even really understand why the plane went down. I mean, they say that it was probably some loose packaging that caught on fire or something like that, but
yeah,
totally an accident.
But here's a synonym of cast away, verb, chuck out. His name is Chuck Noland. And if you do the initial C, Noland, C, no land, he's chucked out in the middle of the ocean where there's no land at all.
You're blowing my mind right now. I don't know if I'm high enough to follow along on this tangent, but you're blowing my mind.
Illuminati confirmed. It's all... Keith said predictive programming earlier. Well, here we are.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of artists like doing those little hidden gems. If you watch anything Vince Gilligan related behind the scenes, you'll know that he puts in like the most ridiculous things. He's like, we made sure not to clean that little thing that Walt left there for the El Camino movie. And it's like, why would anyone catch on to that? So doesn't surprise me. Dan, give me your definition again of the 2-part word cast away. Give that to me one more time.
So it's more of a verb. So it's like to actively discard or fling or toss, like cast something away from you. But
yeah, the only thing that comes to mind immediately is when he says, I never should have gotten on that plane, or when they're sitting down at the table and he sees, his work pager vibrate and he looks up. Maybe he cast away, his life, didn't appreciate it. Next thing you know, he didn't have his life that he didn't appreciate for so long, being so obsessed with business and, getting packages a couple hours earlier. So that's what comes to mind. I have no clue. I mean, I was so off on the original time thing. I'm almost ashamed to keep going on this tangent, but that's what comes to mind.
And was this movie and ultimately a critique of capitalism, saying that it drives people to, lose their personal lives and just worry about time and working all the time?
Casting away their humanity?
Oh, written by a Marxist?
No, because you can definitely, if you are casting away your humanity, what you would want is more available time or leisure time. As we see on the island, he has little to no leisure time to appreciate the finer things in life, which he later appreciates ice cubes at the end. So no, it's a pro-capitalist movie. And of course, if it was a socialist movie, they would have just had someone in the background say, yeah, Reagan's FAA deregulation is what caused that flight to crash. And then things would keep going on. When, of course, when you have there's just two ways to regulate things. There's either voluntarily funded competition or there's coercively funded monopoly. Every time you have a coercively funded monopoly, you'll get higher prices and worse quality. So I'm glad they didn't take that angle, but I sat there waiting for it.
You know what he should have done? Chuck should have unionized and then implemented a minimum wage, and then he would have been prosperous.
While he's on the island? Yeah, absolutely.
Then they would have needed a dictatorship of the proletariat to enforce it. Then people wouldn't have had the incentive. Then you'd have to put them in gulags. Then it would be, the whole world would be Moscow. And then the end of the movie, they'd be putting up the Lenin plaque that they took down at the beginning. So I'm glad he didn't set up a union.
So I want to talk a little bit more about FedEx, because they are almost a character in this film. They're very prominent. So it's even beyond, say, product placement. And you'd think it would be kind of odd for a company to be willing to have an airplane crash that it would be related to them as a company. And up till that point, I believe there was no such airplane crash by FedEx or FedEx plane. But since this movie has been released, I think one or two crashes have occurred and people have died as a result. But FedEx even came into being as the first delivery company to utilize aircraft to do next day delivery for letter and packages. And it was because there was a gap in the market. There was the monopolized, letter service by the US government. And then there's UPS doing like ground-based package delivery. So there was this wide open space that was available, and the technology began to be available to use for the lack of a better term, to exploit that gap and provide a service that the market would benefit from. And that's how FedEx came to be. And I believe FedEx and UPS, in having to compete with each other, also dragged up the USPS in improving their service levels. Because as bad as they can be, they're far better than they used to be. And it's because they do have to compete on a certain level with these private entities.
Of course, anytime you introduce competition, consumers benefit from all existing companies, because the existing companies have to up their game in order to stay in league. So, yeah, I mean, there's no good arguments for a coercively imposed monopoly. That's why, I'm still shocked the statists will defend them at all costs.
Yeah, they sure do.
All right. Well, we're getting to the point where we start needing to wind down. So does anyone have any final points in their notes that they'd like to discuss before we get into what we consider the final summary and review portion of the show?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we touched on the big ones. Division of labor, in as far as economics goes, and as far as life goes, appreciating the things you have. I guess we could also get into subjective value, something you value on land. Something you have is of less value than when you don't have it sometimes in this relationship, or in this case, his relationship with Helen Hunt, of course, prioritizing business over, some family time, especially during Christmas time of all times to be away from a family. That was something in my notes. I mentioned, the stone was his means of production, which he privately owned. I don't see a lot of wiggle room there. He was on the Maduro diet. I thought I'd have a better line for that, but nothing is coming to mind. So, nothing other than that. Maybe we could talk about his cis straight white male privilege that he still had on the island while having to be his own dentist. At least he wasn't being exploited like Bezos and Walmart, who pays no taxes. What a goddamn liar. Imagine, did you see Bernie actually tweet that Amazon and Walmart pay no taxes when he's referring to them as an entity as opposed to naming the individuals who don't pay? That guy is such a liar. I apologize for that. Daniel, closing statements.
Well, I'll just throw one more thing about FedEx that's kind of related to this. I guess they got profiled by the New York Times regarding how little they apparently paid in taxes, and they actually responded to the New York Times in almost a Trumpian fashion, talking about how the New York Times is a failing entity, and that they actually sheltered more money from taxation than FedEx did. And FedEx highlighted how much they've invested in capital to improve service to customers and lower prices and employ more people, basically creating more and more value than the New York Times ever would. And the guy who had responded to the New York Times even challenged them to a debate that would hash this out. So I thought that was a pretty bold move, Cotton, and we'll see if it works out for him. I don't know if the New York Times will actually go through with it. I kind of doubt it, but a little bit related. So anyway, yeah, let's get into some final summary and review. So Robert, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I've seen Castaway probably 6 or 7 since it was released. It's a movie you can put on in the background and get sucked into it. It's a classic. It's weird. There's not any music for like the first half hour. It's pretty kind of an interesting directorial choice. And it's also it's a kind of a, I don't know if you want to call it a brave movie, but in a time when Hollywood, relies on a lot of big action and comedy and things like that. This movie has a really kind of a slow start, and it kind of trusts its audience to follow along on Chuck's journey. Enjoying man versus nature kind of stories. I enjoy, how strong a man is versus, in the environment. I mean, as Ayn Rand famously enjoyed or really celebrated the power of the human mind to overcome obstacles and to solve problems, really championing that ability of, us thinking apes. Man versus nature is a really good example of that, where you've got this kind of middle-aged, suburban guy, and you throw him into nature. I mean, what does he know about how to survive like his ancestors did? He doesn't. I mean, he's watched some movies, he's maybe read a book or two, but with very basic tools, he is able to survive. But it does suck even after he becomes kind of a master of his domain, George Costanza style. Probably not. He's saying there's nobody else out there. I mean, Wilson, he's got I'm not gonna go. Anyway, so I enjoyed this movie. Of course, it says a lot about, anybody talks about, I didn't even think when I first heard about anarcho-primitives being like a real thing, I can't imagine. I don't even know who is advocating for it, but you just got to think about it for half a second before you realize, yeah, it's romantic. Yeah, it really can test your resolve, but for a long-term solution, what are you going to do? You get out into nature and you're immediately going to try and create technology. You're immediately going to try and mix your labor with the land to create a better living situation. So you already got a better living situation right now by ordering something off Amazon or buying something from IKEA or Target. Other people have already done it, and they've already done it better than you could do it with your stone tools and fire. So why not take advantage of the division of labor? Oh, okay. End rant on that. The movie itself is good. Hanks is good. Hunt's good. The story's good. Direction is good. It's all a quality production. It's a classic, and this is it's an 8.5 for me. It's really good. And it doesn't fail under repeated viewings. Like, it just holds up every time. Like, I wouldn't watch it back to back, but I'd watch it every couple of years. Why not? So, Keith, what do you think, buddy?
So my closing statement here, definitely excellent point about man's reason to operate in the world he lives in, ability to homestead products and use them in more efficient ways, creating a hierarchy of values, weighing opportunity cost. That was definitely Ayn Rand's strength. And I think it goes to show you we really need to appreciate the innovators around us, so long as they're operating voluntarily. It's amazing. It really shows you the different mindset in people. When you see a successful person, Bezos, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, all these people, some people go, wow, we really need to tax them. Wow, we really need to regulate them. Well, the rest of us, non-psychopaths are just like, what, just in total awe of, thank you so much for making the world an easier place for me to live in, a place where I could spend more time, having, a record player in the background that I didn't make, lights in the house, so I could spend more time raising my kids. Now, the great thing about anarcho-capitalism is you can own land and exclude others. This means if you are an anarcho-primitivist, you can embrace the Amish ideology. So it's not like, we're saying, well, ideally you'd be able to. We actually have real world examples of anarcho-primitivists. I actually don't know the details of the Amish community as much as David Friedman does in his book, Legal Systems Very Different Than Our Own, where he writes about it. But there is sort of an anarchist element to it. They don't really recognize state legitimacy in a lot of their dealings. But hey, that's the great thing about the tolerance of anarcho-capitalism that allows for such variety. You have the ability to experiment. And, again, just really appreciating the innovators and the risk takers who make our lives that much easier. The Tucker Carlsons even of the world. So it's not just a thing on the left. Tucker Carlson will say, well, jobs are being shipped overseas, which is exactly as dumb as saying, well, at least Tom Hanks didn't ship his dentist job to a different island. He did it himself for the sake of keeping the island strong. That makes your island, it just increases poverty, which is not in the nation's interest, as if he knows what's in the interest of 330 million complete strangers. And then you have real world examples. So in principle, you don't have the right to forcibly stop people from trading. And then in reality, in the 1770, 80% of Americans were employed in agriculture. Today we have 2%. And we don't have a 78% unemployment rate because we still have a great deal of private property, free trade, contract, and innovation. So a lot of people will look at innovation and say, oh, this is terrible, this is going to lead somewhere bad, or this is unequal and is inherently bad. The anarcho-capitalist is in a unique position to not only morally justify his position, but to appreciate the world around us. And movies like Castaway around Thanksgiving are great to watch to reinforce the ANCAP ideas we treasure so much.
And Epstein didn't kill himself. And what was your score, Keith, out of 10?
Out of 10, I didn't like it that much the first time. The second time watching it through, now that I'm a little older, I would say I would give it a 8 out of 10. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Well, I echo a lot of the sentiments that you guys had. I think Tom Hanks was the actor of his generation. He's a little bit older now, but he was kind of this everyman, kind of average Joe kind of guy, very affable. And I think people could identify with him very easily. And so he's always a joy to watch on the screen. The character arc in this film really isn't all that significant. Like, sure, he was sort of not focusing on things that were perhaps more important until he realized or was confronted with not having those things. And so then he had a newfound appreciation for him. But he also found that, even these modern conveniences are actually miracles. I mean, when he gets back to civilization, he has coffee with Helen Hunt, and he's like, she offers him 3 different kinds of milk. She's got 3 different ones in the fridge, and he couldn't even get water without, cracking open coconuts with stones. And, really the biggest thing that he learned was to tie his shoes when he's traveling on an airplane by the end of it. But I thought this was a really good movie, and it really shows an appreciation for all the abundance that is afforded by the vestiges of capitalism that are allowed to operate, even with all the interventions that happen through the regulatory state. And I just wanted to call out that we also appreciate our listeners and you, Keith, for coming on to our show. I'm going to go with a 7 on this one. And I do think it's a really good movie, so it's definitely worth checking it out. And it doesn't age badly. It still holds up to this day, and I think it will for a long time to come, even though the modern conveniences are even more advanced than in the Tom Hanks day as he returns to civilization in this one. So that's going to be our show on The Last Nighters. I think next week we're going to have another guest, and we're going to be talking about The Social Network, otherwise known as the Facebook. And our guest will be Miguel Duque. I think I'm saying his name right. And if not, I'll get it corrected for when we introduce him next week. But we will have the show notes for this one on lastnighters.com/99. And we'll have the deals page on all the stuff for Black Friday at lastnighters.com/Friday. We'll, of course, have links to Keith's YouTube channel. And anything else that we've mentioned on the show, I'll be sure to go through and put those on the show notes page as well. So Keith, thanks for joining us for this episode. And do you have any projects you have in the works right now that you would suggest people look out for coming out of you in the near future?
So right now I'm working on summarizing in video form a number of books that I've read that I think are important contributions to voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism. I would say stick to those. Yeah, the book summaries that I started. I would just ask people to check out the first one, titled "Right and Wrong: Compulsion of the State" by Auburn Herbert. I try to summarize one of the first works in voluntarism where he actually uses the word. That's why I credit him as opposed to Spooner, even though it's just consistently applying the same logic that Bastiat had, that Spooner had, that a lot of these wise minds had before their time. So yes, my book summary collection at Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone.
All right, very good. And as this is our Thanksgiving episode, I just want to say happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And I'll kick it over to Robert because you're very good at this outpouring of emotion and gratitude for our listeners and suggestions on how they can support us, including on Patreon, where they can get bonus content such as our Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which, Keith, if you can stick around a little bit longer, we do some bonus stuff after the end of the show here. And people can get that at lastnighters.com/Patreon. But go ahead, Robert.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I do appreciate you. And this is the time of appreciation, giving thanks. So I want to thank Daniel for being a fantastic producer of the show. Every week he brings on another fantastic guest, like the great and powerful Keith Knight, like we had today. I'm thankful for getting together each and every week and having a great conversation with my lifelong friend, Daniel. I know the Patreon support really does help, but we'd probably be doing this anyway just because I enjoy having conversations with you. And we always seem to have really good conversations when we're talking about liberty. And we mix that together with movies and we do this little show. And I enjoy it. So I really do appreciate you. I appreciate Keith for coming on. I appreciate all our guests. I appreciate our listeners. And you can support us by leaving a like, leaving a review on iTunes, on YouTube. You can drop us a few dollars on Patreon, just whatever falls out of your pocket you wouldn't miss, throw it at us like the animals we are. We wouldn't turn it down. We're not too proud. And thank you for all your support and all your future and continued support. Hopefully you have a fantastic set of holidays ahead of you. And we'll see you again real soon.
All right. And with that, we'll say goodnight from last night, everyone.
Take care.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.